Howdy folks, and welcome to a long overdue edition of Diary of the Deadpit. I am Uncle Bill from Deadpit Radio at deadpit.com, and this week I've decided to do a Troma retrospective. It's going to be traumatic because I've long been a fan of Troma films. You know, since I was a little kid, I used to watch Class of Nukem High and the Toxic Avenger movies, and I'd watch them over and over again to the point where it really pissed off my parents because those aren't exactly the type of movies that you want to be showing a small kid. But for some reason, I always got the comedy in them. I always really enjoyed the comedy. It's a very childish style of comedy, so it fits in pretty well with when I was growing up. In the 80s, these films were usually popular, only maybe surpassed by Full Moon Pictures and Charles Band, who had the huge Puppet Master series and the Trancers and Subspecies series. But in my mind, Troma was the independent film studio of the day. VHS wise, some people did it better, but I don't think anybody made films as memorable as Troma did. And they're nothing like they used to be now. Most of the films that come out now, like Meatweed Madness and Period Piece and films like that, are well, first of all, those films aren't Troma films. That's a distinction that I have to make here, because a lot of the films that Troma releases that are really well known to all the Troma maniacs out there are just distributed through Troma. They pick them up like any other company, like Synapse does or Anchor Bay does. And then there are some in-house films that were directed by guys like Lloyd Kaufman and his brother, I think it's Charles Kaufman, and we'll be talking about those later. But they don't make the type of films, they don't even distribute the type of films like they used to anymore. I mean, these films that they distribute now are nothing anywhere near like they were in the 80s. They're more avant-garde films. They haven't really made a film since probably, geez, I'm thinking it would have to be Citizen Toxie, and then Lloyd Kaufman's been working on the Poultrygeist film, which is the next one coming up, for at least the last 3 years, I would say, and you've heard a lot about that. But I think it got a release date of October the 28th, so I'm really looking forward to that. I mean, that's one of the films that anything Lloyd Kaufman directs himself, I always look forward to it, so hopefully that'll be a good addition. And because I've got so many films here from Troma, and I didn't realize how many I had, it'd probably be best to break this video into 2 parts, because if I try to go through all these, this video will probably end up being 20-some minutes long and make people angry. But to get started off, though, we've got Luther the Geek, which is a story about a little kid who goes to see a carnival, like a sideshow at a carnival, and he sees like a drunk miscreant guy bite the heads off chickens for money and booze and stuff like that. So it does something to him psychologically, and he grows up to be a freak who likes to bite the heads off chickens, and also takes to like a homicidal rage because he's severely fucked up in the head, and he wears like a set of metal dentures all the time, so when he bites things, I guess he can get through them quicker. It's a really odd movie, and the guy who plays the freak in it, Ed Terry, does a really good job actually for like a Troma movie. It's a lot more brutal and a lot less comedic than you might expect. And then there's this one, and I'll be honest with you, like, I know Drawing Blood, I know CK and I watched this one time when this was around the first time I started getting DVDs, but from what I remember, this is one of the most boring Troma movies. If that was possible, then this has to be one of the worst ones in my collection. I know it's a story of a vampire who's like an artist, and I think that she uses the blood of her victims to paint these mysterious paintings and all this stuff. Just stay the hell away from that movie, because it is right in line with like Children of the Living Dead to being just boring, utter nonsense. So then you got an interesting film from the brother of Lloyd Kaufman, Charles Kaufman, and this is a really underrated 80s slasher film called Mother's Day, which is a big attempt to rip off movies like Deliverance and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in which a group of women are going camping, and they're up in the hills, and they run into this family led by this matriarch who's completely insane, and her boys who are like semi-retarded, and they're kind of always, lifting weights and smacking around on each other, very juvenile, but they're into their 30s, it looks like. And so of course they tie up all the women and start to torture them. And the mother, you think she'll be the sympathetic one because she's this little old lady, this little old white-haired lady here on the cover, and you think she would be the sympathetic one, but she turns out that she's the most batshit crazy one out of all of them, and she kind of eggs them on all the time. Just along the lines of movies that were exploitation style movies, this is like a Troma exploitation movie. It's got a lot of the dark humor, but it's also a very sinister film in the fact that there are a lot of torture elements in it too. There's nothing sinister about this next film though, because it's just flat out supposed to be comedic, which is redneck zombies. And when I first saw this film back in the day, we got some glare going there, I don't know what the deal is with that, but when I first saw this film back in the day, I think I liked it a lot more than when I went back and watched it recently. It's the story of a group of rednecks who are making a batch of moonshine, and it turns out that the moonshine gets contaminated with toxic waste from this nearby spill, and it turns all the people that drink the moonshine into these redneck zombies. And the key element here is that even though they're zombies, they happen to attack a lot of people, and there's a lot of racist stuff in the film that's actually pretty funny. I mean, I'm not condoning racism, but it's pretty funny if just on a dark humor level, where there's like a all the zombies in the film are like these rednecks that grow up around on this farm and just basically distill moonshine and sell weed and stuff. So there's a black guy that comes around, and there's like an infamous scene from the movie that a lot of people remember, where he gets his eyeballs poked out of his head, and it's a really good makeup scene. Other than that, though, the film is very, very jagged. Like it doesn't have a good flow to it throughout. There's a lot of scenes where they try to do just the basic comedy stuff with like an army unit and stuff that just did not work at all. Another film that I didn't think worked and a lot of people love, I always saw, this is Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD, I always saw this movie as like a big rip-off of the Toxic Avenger movie, and the fact that it was trying to create another monster that they could market and stuff like that, which they have, but it's the story of a police detective who is possessed by the spirit of this Kabuki Man, and there's like this evil syndicate of hoods, and he tries to take them all on, very much like all the Toxic Avenger movies. And the only main difference between this one is it didn't have a lot of the spirited gore that the Toxic Avenger movies has. It's very light on that. It's kind of heavy on more on action because it's supposed to be like a cop drama more than it is anything. But I just didn't buy it. I mean, it was good-natured, and you can tell what they were trying to do with it, but it's not as fun or as silly as like a lot of the Toxic Avenger movies. And it's very much a cash-in attempt, and I think that that's pretty clear once you watch it. This is probably my favorite Troma release period, like out of all their in-house stuff or all their stuff that has been distributed. This is Buddy Giovinazzo's Combat Shock, which I had no idea what this was when I first picked it up. I thought it would be like another irrelevant Troma film where they kind of, I don't know what I was expecting, like a war comedy movie or something from Troma, because you expect that when they come out with this stuff. But what it really turns out to be is like a very serious taxi driver type of film about a guy who comes back from Vietnam, and he's seen all kinds of horrible shit. And the opening of the film is him watching a platoon of his friends all die, and then he walks past the bodies and stuff. So he's having flashbacks and all this stuff. He's living in New York, I think it's New York, and he's basically he's destitute, really. He's just walking around trying to find work, and as he's walking around the city, he runs into like a street gang, and they try to hold him up and all this stuff, and he's going back and forth with his friends are on drugs and all this stuff, and his baby, he's got like a small infant who's probably one of the funniest damn things ever, although I'm pretty sure it wasn't intentionally meant to be funny, but the makeup effects that they used to create this little creature baby thing that's supposed to be an Agent Orange baby, and it lays there and has this really echoey cry the whole time, and it's just hilarious looking because it looks like a clay baby, you can't really take it seriously, but you can. It's supposed to meant to be taken seriously, obviously, but it's just like a day-to-day grind of what he goes through, trying to support himself after going through the war and stuff. Nothing at all funny about it whatsoever. It's probably one of the more depressing and true to life films that Troma's ever come out with, and I really can't say enough good stuff about it. And the ending of the film is absolutely fucking just, if there's another word for brutal, it's off the charts as far as just sad, depressing kind of ending of the but overall everyone needs to see the movie at least one time, because it is, along with films like Death Dream, a good anti-war movie, really. My second favorite movie, actually, and I don't know if it'll be apparent since there's like a little gleam there, but it's actually Bloodsucking Freak, signed by the director Joel M. Reed. And this one from Troma, this is more along the lines of what you would expect in a Troma film that was picked up for distribution. It's the story of a guy, Sardu, who basically just runs this underground dungeon sadomasochism thing, where he, along with his buddy Ralphus, which is this little bitty black midget, is also the name of Jericho's personal head of security in WCW, which he actually got the name from this movie. He just tortures people, and he has like this service where he runs a theater, and he has these showings of actual torture being done to these women, and everybody thinks that it's just art and that they're just, like it's like a avant-garde dramatic interpretation, and it turns out that it's actually just somebody being tortured to death on stage. And then in the meantime, when he's not torturing people on stage, he just keeps them locked in this, all these women locked in this dungeon, and him and his little buddy Ralphus torture all of them. So it's just an excuse to show a bunch of different, exploitation and gore set pieces, which is great actually. And some of them are completely over the top. The ending is completely over the top, but there's also an infamous scene with a doctor who comes in, and is he a doctor or a dentist? I can't remember. Anyway, he comes in and performs like this amateur brain surgery on this woman, I guess you could say, and it is pretty hard to watch even to this day, but very entertaining film, like off the charts in terms of bad taste. Speaking of off the charts in terms of bad taste, this is probably the epitome of Troma films. Like if somebody was to ask me, what should I watch if I haven't seen a Troma movie, what would describe them in one film, this to me is it. I mean, I know a lot of people would say Toxic Avenger, but Terra Firma it's almost overkill. There's so much gratuitous violence and gore and just offensive shit in it that it's almost too much for one person to take. And it's the story of an independent film crew that's supposed to be mocking like a Troma film. I can't remember what the name of the film is they're making, but it's definitely supposed to be like on the set of a Troma shoot, who are besieged by a bunch of real life killings that are happening to the crew and stuff. And I believe Ron Jeremy's in the film. There's several guest appearances by people in the film, and it's just I can't give away the film, but the killer in it is an amalgamation of like every killer movie that, like, slasher film that you've ever seen. And the first 5 minutes of the film, I believe there's a woman who's pregnant that gets her unborn baby ripped out of her womb by the killer. It's like, holy shit. And then from then on, it just continuously piles offensive material on from that, and I loved it. I mean, it's the kind of film that I live to find. It's one of the later Troma films too, along with this next little beauty. That's actually the film that people who even don't like Troma films like this film. It's Tromeo and Juliet, and this one's actually signed by the director James Gunn, who I had the pleasure to correspond with for a while. I'm actually going to have him on the Deadpit show at some point, if I can just find a time, that's good for his schedule and stuff too. And in this one, it's a basic punk retelling of Romeo and Juliet with Lemmy from Motorhead as the narrator. Debbie Rochon's in it. Tiffany Shepis is in it. It's one of the first films I ever remember seeing Tiffany Shepis in. It was written and directed. I think it was directed by him too. I'm sure it was. It was actually directed by Lloyd Kaufman, written by James Gunn. James Gunn went on to do Slither, and he did the Scooby-Doo movies, and he wrote the Dawn of the Dead remake. He's actually a really, really talented writer, and they had him on board for a couple of films at Troma, and this is by far the best one. I mean, as far as who the hell is into horror is really into Romeo and Juliet? There's very few people, but this one is actually a really cool combination of the telling of the story in a way where it's excruciatingly violent and kind of tasteless, which is what you look for in a Troma film. So I guess we're at about the 15-minute mark. I don't really want to split it up into two parts. Fuck it. If you want to split it up into two parts, just hit pause and come back and watch it later. I'm going to go ahead and get through this shit. I'll go ahead and wait and save those for last, but this next one is one of the ones that I remember when I was a kid. This is the Class of Nukem High box set, and I don't know what it is about these films, but they had a core group of people in them that I just really, really like. And I already had the first film, but I had to go ahead and buy all three of them because it basically has the same cast as the Toxic Avenger. You've got Gary Schneider, who was Bozo in the Toxic Avengers in this one, and Robert Pritchard, who I cannot remember what his name was in there, but he was the one that was like the Bozo's best friend in the film, and Sluggo or something like that. Anyway, it's the story of a high school where there's shit that's already completely out of whack anyway, but there's like a nuclear power plant leak, and it seeps into this school, and there's these two really virginal-like main characters that are exposed to the toxic waste, and they start to break down, and one of them turns into like a Hulk-ish type of superhero who has superhuman strength and stuff, and the woman actually, there's a really famous scene where she actually radiates into like a pregnant woman and delivers this little mutated baby thing, and it's great because it had that mutated weird element to it that a lot of the films dealing with toxic waste had, like the Toxic Avenger, but it also had like a gang element with Gary Schneider and Robert Pritchard in part of this like school gang that went around. There's a scene where they robbed this old woman and stuff, and it was just like a battle between them and then the guy who would actually turn out to be the mutated guy in the Class of Nukem High, and it just had a really cool feel to the whole movie. You had your punks, you had your cool kids, you had your good, goody two-shoes characters and stuff. It was a really good film. I actually tried to watch the second one recently, Class of Nukem High 2, Subhumanoid Meltdown. It's nowhere near as good as the first one. I think there's like a giant killer squirrel in it that's radioactive, but it's nowhere near as fun, and the cast is nowhere near as good as the first one. Sorry about that. Anyway, like I was saying, there's a couple of scenes in Class of Nukem High 2 that actually make it a tolerable movie, but overall I kind of thought it was a little bit boring. I mean, there's the mutated squirrel, and then there's the talking belly button scene, which is actually pretty interesting concept for the film. But I also wanted to mention something about these. At one time, some of these DVDs that Troma was releasing came with these really cool inserts, and one of them that's in this one, and I just pulled it out because I happened to notice it, is the bumper sticker for I Love Tromaville, or I Love Tromaville High School. Really cool idea. I mean, I wrote to Lloyd Kaufman one time, and we actually had Lloyd Kaufman on the show, but when I wrote to him, he actually included this, the bumper sticker, and a bunch of other stuff into like a package that he sent back. He's a really nice guy. I mean, the guy will actually do independent films for free. If you want him to be in your independent film, I mean, he does a lot of them, and you'll notice that he does them through his office. Like, you give him a basic idea of what's going to happen, of what you want him to do, and he'll record it while he's in his office in New Jersey or New York. I don't remember where I think it's in New York now. So it always kind of looks the same when he does cameos, but he does them all for free, and there's not a lot of people that would do that. So finally, the last one, which is by far the worst one. It's special effects by Brett Piper, though, so you gotta love that, from Brainiac fame. Class Nukem High 3, The Good, the Bad, and the Subhumanoid, which features two, like, really, I don't know, they're like the Barbarian brothers for the Troma set, and of course the mutated killer squirrel's back in it again. But this one, as they went along, the films got less and less enjoyable. The first one will always be one of my favorite from the Troma films that were actually directed by Lloyd Kaufman. And this one, by the way, was actually supposed to be directed by Richard Haynes, who I believe directed Slaughter High, and instead, like in the middle of the production, for some reason Lloyd Kaufman didn't like the way things were going. He took over the reins, so it's pretty much 50-50 from what I can understand about how much was directed by Haynes and how much was actually directed by Lloyd Kaufman. So now we move on to the films that everybody knows, the Toxic Avenger films. This one actually says featuring the full head-crushing scene. I don't know what it is about these movies. I think that it, more than anything, is they look like ass, really, but they have a really low budget, grainy kind of charm to them. And this one had a great cast. I mean, for one thing, you had Melvin, who was the mop boy. Melvin is the mop boy who turns into the Toxic Avenger, and I don't know, I think they found this guy, and we were talking to Lloyd Kaufman, and he said he found him because he was hanging around Andy Warhol back in the day when Andy Warhol had his studio, and he had like really unusual people hanging around. But he was really just an eye-catching person to look at. He looked like the biggest nerd you'd ever seen. And then you had Gary Schneider, who I mentioned before, who was like the tough psychopath guy in the film that goes after Melvin and is eventually responsible for turning him into the Toxic Avenger through like teasing him and making him kiss a goat. And you had Robert Pritchard and his wife Jennifer Pritchard, who played one of the females. That there's like the famous car scene where they're hunting down like a kid on a bicycle because they get extra points and they keep score for how many people they run over, and they back over his head and like it shows, and his brain comes out of his head and all this stuff. But the thing I love about this movie is the gore, really. When the Toxic Avenger actually starts taking on people in the film, there's a hilarious scene, and it was like a mixture of really bad actors and really cool looking gore. So like you had the actors screaming and stuff like nobody's business, and then you had these ridiculous looking like arms falling off and stuff. It was just great. There's the restaurant scene where everybody dies by way of food. Like one person gets his head shoved down into like a deep fryer, another one gets put in the oven. It's just, it was fun in a gruesome sort of way. And the second film, Toxic Avenger 2, I watched this again recently. When I was a kid, I used to watch this film constantly just for the opening scene, in which like the Toxic Avenger's working at a home for the blind, and because in the first film his girlfriend's blind, that's the only way she'll have anything to do with him and all this stuff. So he's working for this home, and it's besieged by this company. I don't remember the name of it. It's pretty relevant for the first, or the second two films, the second and the third film, and they're besieged by this group of people, and Toxic Avenger takes them all on. And then there's like the redneck guy, the redneck henchman, and the judo henchman, and he takes them all on. I always thought when I was a kid that was like the greatest thing. And in this one he actually goes over to Japan to search for his father, and when he gets to Japan there's all kinds of hilarious stuff, like he has to take on a bunch of people that know karate and all this stuff, and he uses these weird instruments, like one of these deep batter fish fryer things that he uses on somebody's nose. It's much better when you're a kid to watch this stuff because it is a lot heavier on the humor. In the first film there's actually a message with the toxic waste, and then there's corruption because Toxic Avenger eventually ends up taking on the mayor of the town and stuff. And this one is much more just, you can tell they were going for the comedy aspect. By the time you get to, I don't have the third film, I've got Citizen Toxie, and I don't have the box set either, which I probably should have bought, but I don't know, I never could really fathom buying all these films again since I already bought each one of them used. But the Citizen Toxie disc, the Toxic Avenger 4, I don't like the film as much as I do the documentary. It's got a fucking fabulous documentary on it about the filming of the entire movie. It's a full-length documentary called Apocalypse Soon, the making of Citizen Toxie, with just some of the best scenes. Like, there's one part where the guy who's playing the Toxic Avenger shows up late, and Lloyd Kaufman replaces him with like a black guy to play the Toxic Avenger, just to show him that, hey, he's Lloyd Kaufman. He'll replace you. He doesn't need you. You need him in this case. And this actor has like a drama coach and shit that shows up. The guy that's playing the Toxic Avenger. It's just great. And then you get to see like behind the scenes when Melvin comes back into this film. So I would recommend that you buy the DVD just for that documentary. The film itself's not that great. So 25 minutes in, I'm sure most people that have any common sense are probably tuned out by now. But I want to say that I love Troma films. I'm going to get Surf Nazis Must Die very soon. It's like $7.95 on Troma's site. And I'd like to get Beware Children at Play as well. And those are probably like the only two that I really want to get anytime soon. I've got a pretty nice collection here of the ones that I really wanted. As far as the Deadpit stuff goes, on my blog on MySpace, which is myspace.com/horror, which is, WH and HO, I've got a review of film a day thing going on right now. I've just reviewed The Card Player by Dario Argento. I'm going to be reviewing the Carrie 2002 version here very shortly. I'm going to try to review a film a day for at least the next 2 weeks and probably the next month. And there's a huge sale at Big Lots on MGM titles, so I got a ton of MGM stuff to review. So that should be a lot of fun. Also, this week on Deadpit actually is the Horror Roundtable, and we haven't announced who the guests are going to be for it yet, but needless to say, you really need to check that out. The roundtables are always a lot of fun. I'm Uncle Bill, and this has been another edition of Diary of the Deadpit. I'll catch you later.